You're listening to Astonishing Healthcare, the podcast hosted by Capital RX, focusing on the biggest issues affecting healthcare consumers, benefits plan sponsors, and health plans. We're covering the inside baseball on how things truly work, or don't, in the U.S. healthcare system and pharmaceutical supply chain in an astonishingly efficient way.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the Astonishing Healthcare Podcast. I'm Justin Veneri, your host and Director of Communications at Capital RX. And today, I'm excited to chat with our Director of Formulary Operations, Nisha Bhide. We'll be discussing everything you can want to know about formularies, what they are, how they work, the differences between open and closed formularies, how specialty drugs fit into the equation, and more. Nisha, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Justin. I'm glad to be here and excited for this discussion.
Likewise, so glad we finally found time on your schedule to get you on here. So first of all, congratulations are in order. For those that don't know, or maybe didn't see it on LinkedIn or otherwise, Nisha was named one of Modern Healthcare Executive's 2024 Emerging Healthcare Leaders, which is super exciting and well-deserved. And that's not all. She's also this year's recipient of the Albert B. Prescott Pharmacy Leadership Award. So we'll hype you a little bit here if you don't want to hype yourself.
Thanks, Justin.
So you've been with Capital RX since 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, what led you to Capital RX, and your current role?
Absolutely. I'm very grateful to have received these recognitions this year. I started my pharmacy journey with pursuing a Doctor of Pharmacy degree at the Rutgers University Ernest Mara School of Pharmacy. Following this, I completed a PGY1 Pharmacy Practice Residency, a PGY2 Health System Corporate Pharmacy Administration Residency, and then an Executive Pharmacy Leadership and Supply Chain Management Fellowship. Following 3 years of postgraduate training, I spent several years in the corporate health system pharmacy administration space in the Midwest before joining Capital RX, as we mentioned, in 2020. So today, I lead the Formulary Operations team, as well as currently I'm the PGY1 Managed Care Residency Program Director here. And when I started till today, I got to build out the Formulary Operations team from the ground up to serve all of the different lines of businesses that we serve today. And additionally, I'm very fortunate. I serve on several local and regional and national committees, including the Healthcare Safety and Quality Expert Committee as part of the United States Pharmacopoeia, as well as the Format for Formulary Submissions Committee as part of the Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy.
Awesome. Let's start super high level. Thank you for your help previously. We have a blog that I'll link in the show notes, along with the award announcements. What is a formulary, and where does it, or where do they, because some clients have multiple, right? Where does the formulary fall within the pharmacy benefits workflow?
At a high level, the formulary is a list of medications covered by a prescription drug plan or a plan offering medication benefits. A formulary primarily promotes the safe and effective use of prescription drugs while trying to deliver value to our plan, our clients, and our members. So generally, formularies ensure that members have access to a robust offering of medications that treat all diseases. So they're typically based on committee recommendations. It's called a P&T committee or a pharmacy and therapeutics committee. And this committee has several physicians, pharmacists, patient advocates, and other clinicians with diverse backgrounds that bring their expertise together to review all medications that have been approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. So when putting together the formulary and review of these medications, we look at several things. Importantly, we look at the clinical data of the medication, efficacy and safety data, and then secondarily, we'll look at market trends as well as cost of care and pharmacoeconomics. These variables can change throughout a given year, so the formulary also updates alongside those changes. So typically, we have a P&T meeting quarterly, and so typically you'll see a formulary change every quarter or so in the commercial line of business.
Oh, I had actually a question for you on that. I was talking to Brian Tenike, our National Director of Broker and Consultant Relations. He mentioned that channel partners sometimes ask that. So if they can change quarterly, how do updates end up getting communicated to members?
It's a great question. So after a P&T meeting, we take a look at kind of all those different changes and work with the analytics team to understand member disruption. From there, we put together member-specific lettering to let them know 60 days in advance of the formulary change that this is kind of what the formulary change is going to be, what the alternatives are that are on formulary for that member if it requires a prior authorization or requires an additional quantity limit, and then give them information on how they can submit a coverage exception should they need to. So all of that is available there.
Oh, got it. Cool. Okay. And then you described what the formulary is, what it's typically based on, the P&T community. What is the difference between an open and closed formulary?
We kind of focusing on the commercial space for a moment. Today, we offer two different standard formulary offerings. One is called Liberty, which is more closed, and one is called Freedom, which is more open. The open formulary has more medications on formulary versus the Liberty formulary has more exclusions. So you'll see perhaps brands with many generics on the market excluded on the Liberty formula. You'll see more medications that have therapeutic alternatives that you have a financial upside on, whether through costs or rebates or things like that. You may see more exclusions on the Liberty formulary than you would on our Freedom formulary.
And then you alluded to this, but working on formularies and setup, et cetera, for employers, commercial and health plans, Medicare, CAID, et cetera, are there differences between the commercial and government programs and formularies?
Yes. So our exchange, Medicaid, and Medicare formulary options are more designed to meet state and federal requirements while still balancing the same rigorous review of clinical effectiveness and safety, but also the kind of cost of care component as well.
Okay. So diving a little deeper, are all FDA approved and or regulated drugs included on a formulary?
Not necessarily. So, drugs that don't appear on the formulary list are generally excluded from coverage. There could be several reasons why, including if our P&T committee determines that the medication does not meet safety and efficacy thresholds. Additionally, we exclude very high cost medications that have therapeutically equivalent alternatives on formulary. We may also exclude, for example, as I mentioned, brands that have many generics on the market to promote the use of generic medications. So usually members can contact their PBM or take a look at the formulary on our website to see which medications are covered. But in addition to coverage itself, there may be other restrictions you might see on the formulary. So if a medication requires prior authorization, has a step therapy requirement, could only be FDA approved for certain age ranges, or may have a quantity limit to kind of promote, again, safe and efficacious use of those medications, those restrictions as well you'll see on the formulary. And the other kind of piece of this is the specialty drug piece. So on the formulary, we identify medications that are considered specialty that usually treat more complex medical conditions like hemophilia or multiple sclerosis. They may require special handling, administration, or just coordination of care, and tend to be higher cost compared to some other medications that you may see that are not specialties. So, depending on the pharmacy benefit design and formulary selection, specialty drugs may be part of the benefit with specific coverage or copay requirements. But all of that information you'll see as part of the formulary.
And this comes up a lot. Tiers. What are formulary tiers?
Tiers are the defined area of the formulary where a drug is listed. So a medication could be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then from there in the plan benefit area, you can define what the member's cost share or copay would be based on that tier information. So they really work hand in hand where the formulary will tell you what tier the medication is and then ultimately what the member's responsibility would be associated with that plan design's cost share election.
Okay. And you rattled off a few things like caveats or restrictions, if you will. Prior authorization. We have a great episode on that. I'll link that in the show notes. But then like step throughs and other things that are quote unquote restrictions. Can you just take a minute and share like how listeners should think about those things in the context of the formularies, the list of drugs that are available? It's pretty much integral to the pharmacy benefit coverage for the members, right?
Yes, exactly. So most of our utilization management edits, you could say, are really focused on ensuring members are getting the most safe and efficacious care. So a quantity limit, we may impose one on a product that is a controlled substance, just to make sure that members are getting what is within the FDA approved labeling that is considered to be safe for members. Members may need an exclusion or an exception request to those, which then will be reviewed by our prior authorization team to see if they meet those criteria. But all in all, our quantity limits or our age edits and prior authorizations want to make sure that members are getting the right medication at the right time. And then from kind of step therapy perspective, it's very similar. So the goal really is to make sure that members are stepping through perhaps maybe first line therapies before moving on to second line or third line therapies aligned with national guidelines and associated clinical literature.
Got it. Are there any current Judy, our adjudication platform, or enterprise health technology platform? Are there any current Judy features that make controlling, accessing, understanding the formulary simpler?
Yeah, absolutely. Today, it's very easy to make elections in Judy based on what medications you want to cover, how you want your copay structure and tiering and specialty products to process for your members, as well as it's very easy to make customizations utilizing the tag feature in Judy to the formulary to meet different client needs.
So if a plan fiduciary says, hey, we have members with specific needs or something like that, they can call up their account management team and have a discussion and potentially make a change pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Cool. And we have lists. I know this is like standard, but just if you could explain that, I think it would be helpful in this context, like high cost generics, high cost brands, potentially wasteful drugs with alternatives. Can you explain how some of this works?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll bucket them into three different sections. So the first is the outlier medications that you talked about. These are medications that we standardly exclude on our standard formularies. These are high cost medications that have significantly lower cost therapeutic alternatives on formulary where there's really no clinical reason for those medications to be used. So for example, I can give you is a product that has two generic products in combination, but that is perhaps 50 times the cost of those two individual products available generically on their own. So those types of medications we would exclude outright. The next kind of bucket there is what you mentioned, which is the high cost brands. So this is a list that the formulary operations team maintains to help certain plans who are looking for a tighter formulary with even more exclusions than we have today standardly, they can go ahead and exclude those medications. These are typically medications where there's lower cost, either brands, alternative brands or alternative generic medications. So an example here could be where there is a tablet formulation of a product which is branded and then a capsule formulation of a product that is generic, where they're exactly the same drug with the same dose and the same patient outcome, but significantly higher price. And then the third kind of area is the kind of high cost generic area. So clients can choose to either up tier those medications, where meaning that the member would pay a higher cost share of those products, or they can choose to exclude those altogether. This is another list that the formula operations team maintains. And very similar to the example I gave earlier, this is again where a particular product may be much higher cost compared to other therapeutic equivalent generics. So an example I can give you is there may be a product that's 150 milligrams and there may be another one that's 155 milligrams. And there's really no therapeutic difference in terms of the patient outcome with the extra 5 milligrams, but there's a huge difference in price. And so in that situation, we may, as an election, clients can choose to elect to exclude or up tier that product so that members are paying a higher cost share for the more expensive product when there are therapeutically equivalent generics on the formulary.
All right. And I just have a couple more questions for you. I think the next topic here, the next question I have is in second place in terms of drug coverage in the media, only because of how hot GLP-1s are, biosimilars. I kind of have to ask, what can you comment on biosimilars in the context of formularies today?
Absolutely. So biosimilars are FDA-approved medications that are highly similar to their original biologics. They're also known as the reference product.
Okay.
They're as safe and effective as the original reference product. So biosimilars have no clinically meaningful differences. And so really that means they have the same safety and effectiveness parameters that you would expect from the reference product. The biosimilars also have been proven to go through the submission of robust clinical and analytic data to the FDA. Due to that, a member can expect the same safety and effectiveness from a biosimilar that they would expect from the original biologic. Overall, biosimilars are potential cost-saving alternatives to brand name drugs once the patent exclusivity rights of the reference product have expired. And they're also beneficial because they provide greater access to biologics out in the market than are available when there's just one.
Okay. Similar to what you described earlier about the elections using tags and things, I think about just a comment on GLP-1s. I think it's still about 40% of our clients cover them for weight loss. They're covered for diabetes. So it's like one class of drugs, but it's kind of like for different purposes. On the formulary, it's like this is always covered for diabetes, but it may or may not be covered for weight loss. Does that pose an issue for you and your team? How do you deal with that kind of thing?
So it's very easy to configure these things in Judy. And so today we are able to provide formulary and utilization management information on both the diabetes and the weight loss agents. And then clients can elect in the benefit whether they would like to cover those products or not very, very easily in the plan management area.
Awesome. Okay. Last question. So I ask everybody, what's the most astonishing thing you've seen that you can share, of course, either during your time at Capital RX or related to our discussion about formularies today?
So it has to be for me, because I was fortunate to be here during that time, the launch of Judy and claims adjudication. Just being with the team at midnight, watching the first claim come through was just a very surreal experience. So glad I was here for that.
Very cool. So Nisha, thanks so much for coming on the show, and I look forward to having you back on.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you for listening to Astonishing Healthcare by Capital RX. Head over to cap-rx.com/insights and visit the podcast section for show notes and other relevant content. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And definitely share the link to the show with your network if you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day.